So, yeah, where do we begin? I think most of us, if we know Shepard's work, can see over and over again on screen things such as like Barbara Kruger or Connolly, who you worked with as well. Those of us who live in the LA area probably remember in the 80s the posters that were popping up everywhere. All Over North, Speak, Ronald Reagan, Seed about the Contra event. And this film is both a B film in a lot of regards, but also an art film. So I'd just like you to both discuss how you hit upon it and what the film means to you.
I'll start. So yeah, I think I saw this film within a year or a little more of its release, but on VHS in a friend's house, and with no preparation or warning, no context for it, it was galvanizing, obviously, and it was also. I grappled to put it in a context that I had, which was, science fiction stories like Philip K. Dick's, but also Twilight Zone, because in a way it has the clarity and simplicity of like a Twilight Zone episode. And but there were other elements that I slowly, began to respond to. And one of the things that struck me, when I saw it a few more times was how fascinated it was with ideas of kind of street art, graffiti, and places where signals, cultural signals, go to hide in the culture. And in a way, even the use of the wrestler, Rowdy Roddy Piper, as the actor, is a kind of way of signaling that this is about places where unauthorized voices, unauthorized forms of solidarity or communication are going to be explored. What's so cool about what Shepard did with the Obey sticker was immediately, pull something from the film and throw it back out into this realm of the unauthorized communique, so that you'd encounter it in the street and know that you were, being contacted in some way by the underground, even if it was only the underground in your own mind. I wrote a whole book about it. I could talk about this film forever, but I think we could maybe focus on just a few very particular elements and then, grab some questions from the audience. Shepard, I'd love to hear what your first approach to it was.
I didn't see it until it had already been out for about 4 or 5 years. I had already started the Andre the Giant sticker campaign, which was just started off as an inside joke with some skater friends, but as I love to be mischievous and started putting them around in public spaces, I got a multitude of reactions from people that were very revealing, like a Rorschach test, the nature of people's sensibilities. Some people were very upset at the petty vandalism or the disruption, the rule breaking. Other people saw it as a great act of defiance, and it gave them a giggle. Other people were Andre the Giant fans and thought, like, it's so great you made the eighth wonder of the world into a sticker, and there were some paranoid reactions of people saying that it was Nazi shit or it was a gang or a cult. And so I started to realize that there is a flow of communication, and usually it's from corporations and the government out to the public, who are often sort of spectators within democracy, not meaningful participants. And coming from skateboarding and punk rock, that were total DIY cultures, like, hey, if you don't like the mainstream scene, make your own scene. And then being fascinated by graffiti, I fell in love with the idea of continuing this project of the idea of creating something from nothing and making people ask questions about any imagery they're confronted with, throwing a wrench in the spokes of the usual flow of information, who gets to have a voice and who doesn't. And then when I saw They Live in 93 or 92 or 93, I was, of course, intrigued by the fact that Rowdy Roddy Piper was in it. I liked some of John Carpenter's other films, and Escape from New York's great dystopian film, and but this really hit hard when the first sequence of putting the glasses happens, when you see the signage change, when you see the money say "This is your God," you see the sales sign say "Consume," the marry and reproduce. But the thing that just hit me the hardest was "Obey." And I don't know if I could properly articulate it at the time, but intuitively I understood that this was taking something insidious, nefarious out of the ether and rendering it concretely and then just smashing you in the face with it. And the power of that, it made me feel like, oh, I've been woken up by this. I want to wake other people up. There were so many themes in the movie that I liked. As you mentioned, I was a big fan of Barbara Kruger and Robbie Canal. And the type design that's in the film is clearly inspired by Barbara Kruger's work. I also was a big fan of George Orwell and Ray Bradbury, other dystopian writers, and so, I was primed for this. Plus, all the hardcore and punk that I was listening to from America was railing against Reagan, and I immediately got that this was a critique of Reagan's America. So, yeah, I was like #1 candidate to fall in love with this movie.
Yeah, it's really great to situate it historically and really remember that this is like 88, deep in the triumph of Reaganism and the complete collapse of a resistance culture or a counterculture. So the movie is made from inside a kind of a massive, monolithic consensus, and it's trying to punch its way out of that. And at the same time, it's really incredibly direct politically in certain ways. There are very few American films, Hollywood films, that have homeless people as the protagonists of the film. I mean, that's a really actually shocking decision when you center it, and the film was actually made. Obviously, if you look at it now, the police actions are chilling to an even greater extent than I think they were at the time. But the film was shot the year. It was shot the spring before the Tompkins Square riots and the bulldozing of the encampments there, and it was released just after those riots. So it was really alert to something that was about to become a new kind of thing, which is unfortunately now a fairly standardized kind of thing.
The film, it opened on November 6th for a reason, and it was after 8 years of Reagan and Bush the first got in that date. And when we talk about the destruction of the shanty town, a lot of us in Los Angeles today is the anniversary of the riots, the Rodney King riots. And as we're watching this film and we see the moment when the preacher is being attacked, and when we see the helicopters, a lot of us in the punk rock world, we remember Daryl Gates, and we remember punk rock shows, and we remember them shutting everything down and shutting down any voice. And with the two of you in both your politic and also the science fiction, realm. It's interesting to note with your entry, but also with Jonathan, that the writer of the short story was one of the few people that ever collaborated with Philip K. Dick once. And so you have all those layers on top. We can look at it as a B film, but when I watch this film again, and I'm sitting with the two of you, I think as well of what Shepard has done, and when he's laid it out on the line, and he's been a voice of dissent where there was not maybe much dissent, and you have paid a price to a certain extent for that, and in your activism as well. So as we sit here today, when we think about the politics at hand, it's very difficult to get away from that in this conversation of this film.
Well, I looked at a transcription today of everything that the preacher says in the film, and you can just search for it online, but it is absolutely astounding how what we're experiencing now under MAGA culture and the corruption and the rise of these oligarchs who have so much power, and it is really becoming like a feudal society where many people don't have many options, so whether they like it or not, they're under the thumb of these people. It's such a relevant premise in the film, more so, I think, because it's like, if Ronald Reagan were thrown back into the mix now, Fox News would be calling him a socialist. He actually thought that people who had migrated to the U.S. Without permission should have a path to citizenship and things like that. I mean, crazy, right? But so I think that it's quite important to see the film for the particular political things it's addressing, consumerism, greed, the concentration of wealth, the income disparity, so many different things, the polarization. I love the lines in the film about convincing us to kill each other while they benefit. And, it's not directly referenced in the film, but Carpenter mentioned in various things he said about the film that there's this idea of allowing the elite to deplete the planet's resources. So there was an environmental message too that was, not as overt, but implied. And so, like, I look at it and I want everyone to see it and to think about all the things that it made me think about when I first saw it. I think it's important for this moment. But Jonathan, I liked that you were mentioning that, like anything, like the red pill from the Matrix, things can be flipped around when they are metaphorical. I mean, I think there's a lot that's quite literal in this film too, but there are plenty of things that are symbolic.
Yeah, well, it's a very strange film in a way for how rigorously crude it is, if that makes sense. Like, Carpenter was a classicist, and he didn't ordinarily work with wrestlers as his main actors, and he made films that were much more nuanced than this one in some respects. He was capable. He wasn't fundamentally a kind of a B movie artist in the sense that, like, unskilled people sometimes made great art, like, Edgar Ulmer's Detour or something. He was choosing to work here with a kind of, I don't know what to call it, like a bravura crudity, so that you would experience this as if it were a kind of accidental or underground message. It's like a kind of a stunt to make a film that's literally about ideology, but is also, about, like, a wrestler, saying, I've got I'm all out of bubble gum and, I'm here to kick ass, so that it would be experienced as unnerving and confrontational and, something to argue over or feel, perplexed by, but also exhilarating, as opposed to something that would, you'd be like, oh, that was the coolest, most sophisticated, most adept critique I've ever seen. It's more like a kind of a gut punch. Yeah. And it's, just when you think that it's going to be, in a way, incredibly, after the 10 minutes, which are kind of perfect, the black and white, he puts on the glasses and you see the signage, and you're taken into a world where a Hollywood film, a confusing, kind of murky, realist Hollywood film about a homeless construction worker, turns into an art film with Barbara Kruger images and the most sophisticated kind of these paintings, really, because those black and white images are mostly matte paintings. The next thing that happens is this explosion of almost idiot violence. And you realize that the protagonist, you're going to be forced into alliance with, because you've got nowhere else to look. He's absolutely centered in the film. He's your vicarious buddy to deal with this ideological breakdown, is kind of an idiot, right? All he wants to do is tell them that they look like they put their head in cheese dip and kill them. And this is incredibly satisfying on one level, and it's really dismaying on another level. And that agitation, the sources that Carpenter drew on, things like George Orwell or Philip K. Dick by means of Ray Nelson, or The Twilight Zone, they're almost all, more tempered and more nuanced, and leave you respecting yourself a little more than They Live does. They Live asks you to participate in a kind of a catastrophic pushback, a violent, kind of convulsive pushback against this knowledge that it offers you. And I think that makes it really a study, something you can stare at and have a lot of fun, and then you can end up really, really uncomfortable.
I think that, I haven't mulled this over with the man himself, with John Carpenter, but I always looked at it as the people that go to Berkeley and talk about socio-political issues, they're not the ones that need to connect with these ideas. This is a Trojan horse for people that don't run in those circles. And so I remember seeing it just, and kind of having my jaw on the floor after I watched it and just processing it, and then wanting to watch it again right away. And then the next thing that really hit me was the fight scene. Because the first time I watched it, I was just like, oh my God, this is so ridiculous. When is it going to be over? Then I watched it again. I thought, this is a metaphor for people's resistance to waking up, to opening their eyes, to seeing what's really happening, even when someone tries to explain it to them. Because if it takes them out of their comfort zone, a lot of times it's much easier to just stick with your normal routine and complain about why you haven't won the lottery or whatever, than it is to accept just the brutality of all the dynamics that are oppressing you. And then feeling like you maybe should do something, but you don't even know where to start. That is a feeling that for some people just drives them insane. For me, it motivates me to do a lot of shit.
The film, and you both saw it on VHS first, and I saw it when it came out initially too, and it blew my mind in that it's really a series of vignettes of other films. So he's playing with genres. There's the John Wayne Searchers with Roddy in the doorway. There's the nod to Godard and Alphaville. There's the nod to the just action film, which John Carpenter is part of. He's calling back to Assault on Precinct and some of the barred windows in this film as well. Jonathan, in your book, and as I'm watching it tonight, I think about you mentioning how the bank scene when he's shooting all these aliens, or when he's shooting the cops, that is one of the most violent films. It's like a Peckinpah film almost. And when you're hitting on that too, and when you hit on your glasses, and you came up first with your glasses, something I think we should pull from the book and throw back to Shepard, and then I'll take some questions. He mentions the Hoffman glasses when he first gets the glasses, and that's a very pointed reference of three different people, and you hit on this very succinctly in your novel. Maybe.
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to remember who they all are. I mean, the inventor of LSD, right, is Albert Hoffman. So putting on Hoffman lenses, that's a pretty charged suggestion there. But now I have to remember, you just looked at it and I haven't. What are...
well, there's of course Abby Hoffman.
Abby Hoffman, right.
And Abby Hoffman, the Yippie.
Yeah, steal this book. Right, it's another exhortation to break out of the register of commerce. Right, I've written a book, now steal it.
And your third point, which this is another thing, especially in this day and age, the book you wrote was before MAGA 1 or 2, was you hit on Michael Hoffman, who was a Holocaust denier.
Right, yeah. I mean, who knows which things Carpenter was thinking of when he used that name in the screenplay. It'd be interesting to ask him whether any or all of those reverberated for him. Probably the LSD one.
John Carpenter, what did...
But, yeah, one of the things that's so fascinating to look at in this film for me now is the way in which the unexamined, excruciating pain of those workplaces that are mingled workplaces, like the bank and the TV station. And, if you think of this movie as being like a allegorical one about, people working with the enemy, and then the only solution is for someone to run through the space and machine gun the bad ones. It can suddenly flip, and you can experience the anxiety of the psychosis that there are humans and non-humans among us, and that's what people who do a workplace shooting they think they're sorting them out, right? And suddenly Roddy Piper becomes a monster in those scenes, because that's how the humans are, certain people are obviously experiencing him in the bank and the TV station. But I also, Shepard alluded to the fact that just as red pilling has been appropriated from The Matrix, this film, despite some really specific references, like the TV signal jammer says that racial justice is in tatters, which seems to align the film pretty clearly in one direction. It has nevertheless not been immune from appropriation from the most kind of unspeakable ideological I don't know what to call them, game players who want to sort of provoke the idea that there are lizard people among us, and they have to be sorted out, and in a very unfortunate way. I mean, Carpenter himself has had to do some public pushing back against some of the attempts to pull this movie over into a right-wing interpretation. So it's sort of like, make a super crude allegory and beware of what might happen to it, because it doesn't belong to you after you floated out there.
And Shepard has been on the receiving end of this as well. When we're watching the film, and the first scene when the train and the reveal and all the graffiti, and I think about you up on a 6-story building, putting something up, and I think about helicopters and you. I don't think about them so much with you, Jonathan. And I think about the police coming and what you've been through, but also the line about the everybody sells out, and to be here with the two of you gentlemen today who have not sold out and continue to make your art and your books and yourselves available for good deeds and for nicety to be with us tonight. I really appreciate it. With that, I'd like to take some questions.
Let's take some questions, yeah.
If anybody has any questions, I'll run out to you.
I really like this idea that Shepard brought up about the cultural Trojan horse, because it's interesting because this movie has like the Hollywood beauty lighting and the crane shots and the Rambo sequences, but it kind of needed that platform of theater to get this message out. So my question is, in today's world where the platform is limited to 15-second videos and they're all algorithmically curated, and even like ideas of resistance become like a 10-second attention grab that you forget about, how do you get the message of anti-consumerist, anti-capitalist resistance out when no one's really actually paying attention anymore?
The dilemma you're talking about is very, very real. I love to be a provocateur, but it's all with the point of trying to get people to not be selfish, racist, sexist, xenophobic, destroy the planet that's our only home, etc. And yet, you know, a lot of my social media is about trying to deliver these ideas through artwork I'm making, storytelling, but something I've realized is the algorithms punish civility. It gets pushed to the bottom. Only outrage stokes the algorithm in your favor. And this is, I just read a book by Yuval Noah Harari called Nexus, and it's talking about how this is very intentional because engagement has been proved to extend when it's driven by fear, hate, anger, conspiracy theories, confusion, debate, creating arguments, arguments around settled science that 99% of the scientific community agrees upon. So we are, I'm sure everyone's probably heard Marshall McLuhan's phrase, "the medium is the message," which was really looking at the syntax of different communications, such as television, telephone, and how we might change our style of communicating to suit those mediums. Well, when we change our style of communication to such a degree that it's changing the way we think and every aspect of our culture, if it's going in a direction that makes us impatient, entitled, and more stupid, then there's a problem. And so I use all those mediums because they're part of how we communicate. But I also try to do things in the real world. I paint really large murals. I do street art still. I make, here's what he said, I'm not a sellout. I'm such a sellout. I have a clothing line. Isn't that the, I've actually been making clothing as long as I've been doing street art, but according to the internet trolls, I developed street cred and then cashed in with a clothing line. But part of the reason I've always believed in that as a medium is the same reason that John Carpenter used Roddy Piper. It's a populist medium that gets through to a lot of people that traditional art doesn't. So I'm trying to connect with people where they are living their lives in ways that might also make them think about how a person who is not a huge corporation can make an impact on the landscape and get people talking. I think there's something visceral about seeing things in the real world that's different than from the sort of safety of a screen. So, I'm going to always use every single platform I can, but I'm deeply concerned about people mostly focusing on these short, very short videos and things that don't demand a lot from us intellectually.
Yeah, totally satisfying answer, and I won't linger. I think we should move to another one. I'll just say that there's something happening right in this space at this moment, which is, I may be indulging my own self-consoling belief system, but I always think that the primary situation, the dominant situation, creates an appetite for its deep opposite. So people are really hungry for gathering and presence and also sustained experience. Long novels are kind of, people believe that the secret might be in there somewhere too, or experiences that can't be translated to the internet or to a brief clip on the internet, and someone will say, you've really got to investigate this. So I think that we're exhibiting right now that some of that appetite for the opposite by being here and watching this movie.
I do want to move on. I totally agree with him. Thank you all for being here. It means something. I think that all of this technology is so new that the dust hasn't settled. We're not realizing how deeply unhappy a lot of it makes us. I know that I have ADHD, and so carving out space to concentrate on art and design is really important to me, and time disappears and I work through things and it's like the happiest I ever am. The most miserable I ever am is trying to multitask. And so we're using a lot of these tools that are spreading us thin and fragmenting our attention. And I think eventually the pendulum will swing back because people will just realize, like, oh, all the stuff that was supposed to make me more stimulated, more happy is actually making me miserable for myriad reasons. So I maybe I'm just an optimist, but I think it might move back in the other direction, like Jonathan's saying.
Based on what y'all have shared, and I think the first question really brings out some interesting components around the value of violence as a mode of communication. And the film poses both its success on an interpersonal level and its failure at a communal level, seemingly. We don't see a conclusion or result to whatever the effect on the satellite dish is at the end. So, difficult question for an artist and a critic. Where do you see the value of violence and or the need for hybrid warfare amidst this kind of like ideological crisis, both within the left, but also amidst the very real material impacts that people both locally, whether the students at Pomona who are protesting for Gaza or the larger efforts to combat immigration crises and the role of ICE in our communities, where do these pieces align and amidst now that it is 2025 like the film?
But I want to bring it back to the film first to say, I don't think They Live proposes an answer in a direct, prescriptive sense. And in fact, I think the film is extremely bleak. And that it's not just that he dies to kill the satellite, and that what's her name, Meg Foster has been turned. Which, by the way, is a study trying to figure out where in the film she's been turned is really a peculiar puzzle, because you're with her 3 different times, and you could argue that she's already on their side at the very beginning when you meet her. You could argue that they make an intervention after that and before she shows up at the rebel meeting, or you can somehow think that she gets turned between the rebel meeting and when she kills them at the end. And it's just kind of a great puzzle. But the darkness of the way Carpenter brings in archetypes of solidarity and romantic connection for these characters and then takes them away. And even the detail that Drifter, who's the sardonic homeless guy who becomes their escort into the underground, the one who says we all sell out every day, the tiny detail that he's allowed to use the watch and escape, that he does not get mowed down, seems to me an expression of Carpenter's real morbid apprehension that the problems he's raising here are not going to be solved by his characters, and that the game might be lost within this film. And even the very ending, the shock, comic, porny moment, I think turns on a kind of a pun, which I like to believe is really conscious one for Carpenter, which is, that's from the point of view. So the film, if you look at the way the film uses black and white and color, we only see the ghouls when the glasses are on the characters who are wearing them and we're in their point of view shots. When the film goes to omniscient shots, which is to say, what we're all seeing, they look human again. They're in color and they look human again. So the film is explicitly telling you that you don't see yet. You're not wearing the glasses. Just watching this movie doesn't necessarily put them on you, because as you watch the film, you're fooled too. It's only in a few point of view shots that you get the truth of who's a ghoul and who's not. And the headaches, the torment that the glasses impose, is an argument that the truth hurts. That actually to take it in would be to sacrifice and suffer. And yes, you might move to another place in time, but you're going to be asked, as in the fight scene, to let go of your middle class aspirational collusion with this society of commerce and illusion and ideology. Now, I don't think the film can think its way out to a positive prescription. I think it's stuck inside its own despair, actually, if you really consider all of those different clues. And Drifter, who conveys the message that we all sell out eventually, twiddles his little watch dial and he gets away. Even in a film where human life is very cheap and everyone gets mowed down, he explicitly goes unpunished. I don't think I've answered your question at all, but I've talked a lot, so I'm going to stop.
He's got a lot of great insights about the movie. I appreciate that. Maybe because I feel like it validates some of my thoughts about not specifically that movie, but about other dystopian things. I've had a spiel ever since 2015 when Trump was on the rise, which was, 1984 is cautionary. It's so bleak. You end up in room 101. There's no escape. A boot to the face for eternity. You don't want the variables that lead to that to be allowed to take root. We're past that point. Those things have taken root now. And I don't think we're past the point of no return. But when you're talking about what the left should do and violence, I always see violence as a metaphor. I mean, I say, we're fighting for peace all the time. It's actually an oxymoron. It's totally absurd. But you understand what I mean when I say that. I think that one of the big challenges is when you have moral principles, you're sometimes hindered in the fight. You can't fight dirty because it contradicts your principles. When you have no principles, you can play as dirty as you want. And there's been a lot of debate about how to contend with that with our current social landscape, media landscape, and social media landscape. So I guess I've just decided that like I'd rather live maybe in, in isolation than give into just doing all the things that would be fighting fire with fire, because I'd just be disgusted with myself. So when we all know that, that fear that something will be taken away from you, fear that you will be hurt physically, fear that you will be hurt emotionally, all of those things are really powerful, that you have to work twice as hard to inspire people to search for the means to make not only their own life better, but collective life better. That we're social creatures, we really depend on each other. Fabric of society is something we all depend on. So if our lives are going to be better, that can't be a totally selfish thing if it's compromising someone else's life, because we're threatening the entire ecosystem. So how do we get those ideas across? That's much more complex than like, you don't do what I say, I kill you. That's easy. So to every creative person, I say, that's what creativity is for. Don't do the dumb bullying thing. Figure out how to make the beautiful creative thing more inspiring than the other is more, going to shut you up and make you fearful and conforming to someone else's idea, not following your own beliefs. I mean, but I don't know if that answers your question at all, but anyway, I tried.
We have one last question up front, and then I'll be quiet. But I wanted to thank you all for coming out tonight, supporting this independent theater, supporting all the sponsors that are all independent sponsors in the neighborhood, and for Shepard and Jonathan to take the time tonight. Really appreciate it, and thank you for supporting this theater. We have one last question. You dirty out. We're going to be doing more events, hopefully as good as this one. I know, that's Franklin. He's an event unto himself. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having this. So this follows on from the last. I mean, it's all the same question in a way, but I'm thinking about the difference between this time and the time that produced this movie and our time, and we already said this is a kind of ideological critique that, whatever its specific qualities, it belongs to a genre or a moment that includes Barbara Kruger and maybe, I don't know, Negative Land and various things that are all about piercing the veil of ideology, as you said. And one thing I think when I'm even watching it is what we have now is a moment where it's not as though the veil hardly need be pierced. I mean, when I see Stephen Miller or Steve Bannon, I don't need the glasses to see the ghoul, right? And you would think, so you would think, right? So actually what I just want to ask both of you is, what works of recent, or maybe not so recent, do you think speak to our moment, whether literary, cinematic, whatever, besides your own, of course? Speak to this moment in a way that you think that they live might have been the appropriate critical response, or part of a critical response to its time, given how naked things are now.
That's great.
first of all, I think it's really interesting, and I'm just going to build on what you said before I try to answer it at all, to say that, yes, I think one of the paralyzing things right now actually is that unmasking used to be the gesture that was the fundamental kind of radical, critical intervention, right? Mm-hmm. Take away the illusion. That has not only stopped being relevant because of the kind of brazenness, the ploy of everything's in scare quotes, so we're just going to say the worst thing we can say, and there's no unmasking needed. We just have to dare you to believe us. But I think unmasking has also, as a game or a kind of gesture, has been appropriated so that it's this fascination with fake conspiracies and fake revelations, the kind of scandal and reveal stuff has lost its polarity. It's just a kind of free-floating, almost nonsensical energy now. Everything's always being unmasked, and it's always already obvious. Mostly, I think that we've made a shift where, at some point, dystopianism itself, which I, basically grew up inside, thinking that was like the fundamental space to enact, my thinking, and all my favorite stuff was very dystopian, and that it's become pretty appropriated and plastic and corporate, actually, which we can spot like that there are corporate dystopian flavors, right? Children's books and stuff, but I think that that actually means that it's become automatic, even at the more sophisticated levels. It's not really going to tell us very much, because the reality is producing more vivid and obviously more intrusive and arresting dystopias than we could ever possibly depict in our allegories. So the pivot is the other way. Images of solidarity, images of possibility, and and transformation, polymorphous. One of the things that's really become really clear to me is that fascism is about fixing all definitions. It's terrified of transformation, per se. That's why it's gender obsessed. There's two, and it's just going to break off all the exits for transformation. So I think transformation itself is the language that needs to come alive to move around and in between and express the social possibilities and the insights that are going to, so for me, like the more transformative, the more polymorphous, the more likely to crack open this moment a little bit.
Yeah, I think the us versus them idea is one of the things that makes They Live so compelling, but also is dangerous in that it totally lacks nuance. And what I have realized, I think one of the reasons that it doesn't matter that Trump said, grab him by the pussy, or Stephen Miller says all the things he says, or Steve Bannon says all the things he says, is because the people that are on that team think that our team is the ghouls.
Yeah, completely.
So, like we're okay to be complicit with Rowdy Roddy blowing people away, somewhat indiscriminately, because they're the ghouls. But that's what we're seeing play out in the political polarization. So something that I read a couple years ago that I found to be really, really insightful and well done was Naomi Klein's book Doppelganger, where she's looking at initially her narcissism during the pandemic, where she's Googling herself, and then she realizes that she's being confused with Naomi Wolf, who used to be a sort of third-generation feminist and who's become a full right-winger, and she's examining what happened to Naomi Wolf, Wolf's personality, the tools she's using, social media, etc., a lot of the variables, and it's not, it's clearly stating what Naomi Klein's values are and how horrified she is that she's being confused with Naomi Wolf, but it's also somewhat sympathetic to some of the things that happened to Naomi Wolf that started to drive her in the other direction because she had basically been canceled by the people who she originally was out to bond with over feminist issues. And when one thing goes wrong and all of a sudden you're not invited to that party anymore, it drives people into the arms of people who are very extreme in the other direction sometimes. And this has happened to RFK, Russell Brand. Trump donated to Hillary Clinton's Senate campaign, and he was pro-choice. So I think that looking at things not so black and white and looking at what some of the variables are is very important right now. And I don't know anything in mainstream entertainment that's quite doing that, but Doppelganger is a pretty good book.
Yeah, I love that book. I second that recommendation. We should quit and let everybody go home. It's been awesome that we all gathered like this. Thank you. Yeah.